Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jessica and today I'm going to be reviewing all of the books that I read in January. I read 12 books in January, which is a great amount. I had 10 on my TBR and then I actually had to add 2 more books because I ran out of books to read, which was so exciting. But I did finish my entire TBR. I don't know if that has happened the entire time that I've had this channel, so it is a great milestone. I'm going to begin with my favorite and least favorite books of the month. And then after that, we're just going to go in chronological order through my reading for the month. I'm going to try not to have this video be an hour and a half long, but no guarantees because some of these books I have a lot of thoughts about. Let's begin with my favorite book of the month, and that is Witchcraft for Wayward Girls by Grady Hendrix. This is the story of a girl named Fern. Fern is not her real name. It's the name that she was given when she arrives at a home for pregnant teenagers where she's going to have the baby and then return to her regular life as though nothing has ever happened. It takes place in 1970, and it is very much a world in which girls do not have a lot of agency, they don't have a lot of choices, and for a lot of these girls, they have not had a lot of chances in life. I'm a big Grady Hendrix fan. I have given 4 or 5 stars to almost all of his books, but I'm going to tell you all that this was a 5-star read, and it was my favorite book by Grady Hendrix that I have ever read. I saw an interview with Grady Hendrix where he talks about the fact that the first draft of this book didn't even have the witches in it, and I can 100% see how that could have been, because the first portion of the book, I would say probably the first 30%, is basically just a historical fiction novel. And if there had never been any witches, I actually would have been just fine with it because I was so captivated with the story of these girls and how they ended up in this situation and what was going to happen to them and the way that people were lying to them by saying things like, "You'll be asleep, there's no pain, you won't remember anything," that kind of thing. It just really touched me, thinking about the experiences that they had and thinking about the fact that there are still a lot of women and girls in this world who still don't have a lot of choices. It felt both historical and it felt very present day. It's very much a story of the patriarchy. It's about women's rights. It's about friendship. It's about empowerment. I don't want to spoil anything about this story. I will give you a couple of things to know before you read it, just in case they are specific things that bother you. It's not so much a horror book in the traditional sense. I would say there's not a lot of gore, but the gore that is there is specifically going to be related to pregnancy. So if that is something that you are sensitive to, I would be aware before you read the book, and I might not pick it up. For me, it was pretty easy to read in that sense. There was nothing that just absolutely horrified me in that sense. Now, the treatment of these girls, that absolutely horrified me. And I cried. There are witches. I didn't mention the witches. They get a magical book from a witch. I'm not going to spoil anything. And there is witchcraft, but I would actually say that that was the smallest part of the book for me. It was much more about the historical setting and about the girls. Grady Hendrix is one of the best male authors that I have encountered for writing female characters. At no point did I feel like any of these characters felt like they were written by someone who didn't have the lived experience of being a woman, and I think that's very unique. And I've thought that about his other books too. I think it's something that he really excels at. My second favorite book of his is the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, in which he also has really amazing female characters, but this one topped it for me. I think this is his best book. I would not really classify it as horror in the way that his other books are, and I think if you would like to read Grady Hendrix, but you're not a big horror reader, I think you would love this book. So it was 5 stars. 100% 5 stars. I would recommend it highly. It is my top recommendation of the month, and I think you should read it. Okay, now we're going to move on to my least favorite book of the month. I don't want to say worst, because I know there are going to be people who really love this book. It just was not for me. And that book is The Stars Too Fondly by Emily Hamilton. This is a cozy sci-fi. It's got some stakes to it in the sense that the characters are in these high stakes situations, but it is essentially a romance. So I would classify this as a sci-fi romance, and it did not work for me. I did not care for the romance. I didn't care for any of the characters. I thought that there was no science in it whatsoever, which I don't need all of my science to be perfect. I mean, I'm a Star Trek fan. I can technobabble with the best of them, right? But I thought that the science in this book didn't make any sense. And there wasn't a real attempt to have it make sense. Like, at least if you're gonna lie to me, do a good job. So this is the story of Cleo and her friends. It's primarily the story of Cleo. Her friends were interesting, but they didn't get a lot of airtime in this book. It was mostly about Cleo. Cleo is a scientist. I believe that they are all PhD students or graduates. They're all in their late 20s, early 30s. They felt much younger. We'll get into that later. Cleo and her friends go to visit this spaceship that has essentially been dry docked because of an accident that occurred on it 20 years ago, and they accidentally blast off into space on it. Nobody knows how. So that's kind of the setup of the book. There is a romance, and the romance is actually going to be between Cleo and the hologram, I would say, of the previous ship's captain. It's a little strange. I did not buy the romance. I thought that there were a lot of ethical considerations that should go into romance with an AI that were not like even talked about at all. And I'm not going to spoil it, but there was some stuff that bothered me about that. It's also very spicy, but only at the very end of the book, which again, you go through the whole book, it's like basically no spice. And then at the end, it gets real spicy. And I was like, I was not prepared for that. So but in general, it felt very young. The characters felt very young. Their thought processes felt very young. The situations felt very young. Nothing felt really fleshed out. I was really sad. I would recommend this, I think, for people that are fans of cozy sci-fi, but it's not nearly as good as something like a Becky Chambers or something like that. This was a 1-star read for me, to be honest. There was just, I read it all the way to the end because I was reading it for a book club. And then I didn't even participate in the book club because I was like, I don't think anybody liked it, but I couldn't even like get out how much I just like did not care for this book. And I have to tell you all that it has the prettiest cover. Look at the cover. The cover is like so pretty and I wanted to love it so much. And I just did not. It was just not believable to me and just not a really good book. But having said that, this is a debut novel and I would read something else by the author because I think that she probably has a lot more to offer than we got in this example. So it's nothing against her, but this book did not work for me. Okay, so now we're just gonna go in the order that I read these books. And the next book that I read is Lavender House by Lev A.C. Rosen. And I gave this book 4.5 stars. I thought that it was really good. This is a mystery set in the 1950s. We follow a detective named Evander Mills, who goes by Andy, who has been recently fired from the police force in San Francisco because he was caught on a raid of a gay club. So he's been kicked out of the police force for being gay. And he's kind of at the end of his ropes when a woman comes to him and tells him that her wife has been murdered, but no one thinks she was murdered. So the woman who was murdered was Irene. Irene is she was the head of a soap empire. Her name was Irene Lamontagne. And I may have said that wrong also, it's French. And she tragically fell to her death in their home and the police don't think it's suspicious, but her widow thinks it is very suspicious. So she hires him as somebody who is going to kind of understand the community that she lives in to try to solve the mystery. He goes to the house, he finds that there exists this kind of queer found family, and I loved the found family aspect of this book. I loved all these characters and the little isolated home oasis that they had made for themselves in this society that does not really want them to exist and to be happy. Andy struggles with the fact that he has for a very long time been a part of the system that has oppressed him and has oppressed all of these people. And that's something that's very much a part of this book. At the beginning, I thought it was a little bit slow, but as it picked up, I was very invested in the mystery. It's maybe not the most mysterious mystery, but I was very invested in it. And I really loved the characters. And I was really excited by the end to follow on because this is the first book in a series. There are 2 books already released, and I'm sure he's working on another one. And I'm really excited to read the second one. I thought this was really good, and it's a good exploration of a world that you don't often see explored in mystery novels. And I thought it was really great. So if you like mysteries and you like historical mystery and the setup of this book sounds interesting to you, I would highly recommend it. It was 4.5 stars for me. The next book we have is one that I have been meaning to read for a very long time, and that book is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. I have been meaning to read this forever, but I've been a little bit scared off by the fact that people seem to feel like this book doesn't have a plot. Like that's the main complaint that I always hear from people is The Night Circus doesn't have a plot. And so because of that, I was like, I don't really know if I want to read it if it doesn't have a plot, if it's just like descriptions of a circus. I don't know. But then Sean, he's a member of a Patreon for a YouTube channel here called Good Books Lately. And he was reading this book last month with them in their book club. And so I decided I was going to read it too, since he was reading it and he was telling me all about it. And I have to tell you all that I really, really enjoyed this book. I gave it a 4-star rating. And for the most part, it did everything that I wanted it to do. And I don't understand the criticism that it doesn't have a plot. There are a lot of descriptions. So this is going to be a book that you're going to enjoy if you really love descriptions in your books. So a lot of descriptions of the circus, a lot of, there are these kind of interlude chapters where there is a you and you're the character walking through this circus and seeing all of these wonderful circusy things. But it's not just about that. It's the story of this circus, how it came to be, and it's the story of 2 characters who fall in love. The 2 characters are named Celia and Marco. And Celia and Marco are kind of on opposite sides of this magical battle. I don't want to spoil anything because I want you all to be able to discover the secrets of the circus for yourself. But it's the story of the situation they're in. It's the story of their love story. That's part of the description of the book, so I don't think that's a spoiler. I loved everything about the descriptive language in this book. Erin Morgenstern is so good at writing descriptions that make me want to go there. I don't even like a circus that much. I mean, a circus is fine. But this made me want to go to a circus, and it made me want to go to this circus. And I just thought it was something really special. The only part that did not work for me quite as well was actually the romance. The romance was not something that I found myself particularly compelled by or caring about, but there are some other characters who I really, really loved, some other situations that I really, really loved. And so ultimately, this was a 4-star book. I'm sorry I waited so long to read it, but now I am excited to read her other book, The Starless Sea, which I actually already own. And hopefully I'm going to be getting to that soon. The next book that I read was a novella, and it is The Empress of Salt and Fortune by Nghi. I'm going to give you that cover. So pretty. And you can see how thin it is. This is the first book in the Singing Hills cycle. The Singing Hills cycle is the story of a monk who is traveling with a kind of a magical bird that is his companion. He comes from an order of monks that basically they gather stories. They want to learn stories. They keep the stories in the monastery so that the stories won't just disappear. I've already read book 5 in this series. They are all standalones, but this is the first one. I wanted to go back and read it. This is the one that won the Hugo Award. And everyone says it's the best one in the series, so I was really curious to read it, and I really, really enjoyed it. I'm going to read you a little bit of a description because I don't think I'm going to be able to explain it quite as well. A young royal from the far north is sent south for a political marriage in an empire reminiscent of Imperial China. Her brothers are dead, her armies and their war mammoths long defeated and caged behind their borders. Alone and sometimes reviled, she must choose her allies carefully. Rabbit, a handmaiden, sold by her parents to the palace for the lack of 5 baskets of dye, befriends the emperor's lonely new wife and gets more than she bargained for. So this is basically the story of the monk learning the story of the Empress of Salt and Fortune and Rabbit, her companion. And it was such a great feminist mythological tale. I really enjoyed the characters. Nevo, this is not my first Nevo book. Nevo is an amazing writer in terms of the lyrical quality of the prose. If you like beautiful writing, I would definitely recommend checking Nevo's books out. This one is really short and easy to get into, so this would probably be the one of her books that I would recommend you start with. I don't know. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really great. It was very short. I cried at the end, and it was very unexpected because I was just so moved by the story and the characters and what the author was able to do in this really short little volume. So I would definitely recommend this one. The next book that I have has been on my TBR also for a really long time, and that is The Great Believers by Rebecca Makkai. This is the story, it's historical fiction. It's set in 2 time periods. It's set in the early 1980s where we follow a group of gay friends who are dealing with the AIDS crisis. And it's also set in 2015 where we follow one of their sisters as she travels to Paris to try to rescue her daughter from a religious cult. Those are 2 very different sounding stories, and it does suffer, I would say, a little bit from the thing that happens to me in historical fiction where there are 2 timelines, in that I was so into one of the timelines that every time we went to the other one, I was annoyed. and I wanted to go back to the other one. So that's a danger, I think, of this style of writing, is if the reader is not equally invested in both timelines, it might make it feel a little bit like a chore to get through those sections. If I were only rating the 1985 section, if I were following these men as they dealt with this new kind of illness that was upon them, dealing with the political fallout from that, dealing with the prejudice that they faced as a result, I mean, it would have been 5 stars. That part was 5 stars for me. And unfortunately, the modern part just did not really work for me in the same way. And it pulled the book down to about a 3.75. Now, I did really like this book. I read it in just over 24 hours, and it's a 500-page book, so I really enjoyed it. But I just didn't care about those modern sections, and I just really struggled with that. So because of that, this is going to be kind of a mixed rating for me, but I would still recommend it if you're interested in the subject matter. And I know there are a lot of people who have enjoyed both sections, so this may just be a me kind of situation. But for me, it was just about 3.5 stars. Now we have another novella, and that's going to be Thornhedge by T Kingfisher. You all know how much I love T Kingfisher. She is one of my all-time favorite authors. She's an auto-buy author. I have loved everything she has ever written, and this novella was no exception. This was a solid 4-star read for me. It is kind of a retelling of Sleeping Beauty, but it's also very different from the story of Sleeping Beauty that we know, so I can't really explain too much without spoiling it. Know that our main character is named Toadling and that she is capable of turning into a toad, but also being a person. There is magic, there are witches, there are sorceresses, there is a tower that is covered with thorns, and there is a brave and handsome knight. I absolutely loved this book. It packs a lot into such a teeny tiny little small package. And as always with T Kingfisher's hardcovers, we do have some of her own beautiful artwork, because I think she started as an illustrator, and I love this little toad. So sweet. This is one I would definitely recommend, and it's probably one that I would recommend if you're looking to get started with T Kingfisher, because it's pretty representative of her work without being too long and having to get through too much on your first book. Next we have The BlackTongue Thief by Christopher Beuhlman, and I have a reading blog on this, which I will link down below in the description section. This was about a 3.5-star read for me. I enjoyed it, but I didn't absolutely love it. But there were enough things about it that I really liked that I am recommending it to people that are interested in this style of fantasy. This is very much, I don't necessarily want to say grimdark, but maybe I mean grimdark. It's a darker fantasy, but it also has a lot of humor. I've seen people compare this to The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch, which I have not read yet, so I cannot speak to that comparison, but it was definitely very funny. And whether you're going to like it or not, I think depends a lot on how you felt about the sense of humor, because it is nonstop. It is like one-liners all day. And it's also, you know, got a little bit of kind of body humor to it, I would say. So if you don't like that, you're probably not going to like it. But anyway, this is a story of a thief who chooses the wrong mark and then goes on a journey. It's so complicated that I don't really know how to explain it. It does have some absolutely amazing female characters. There are some fantastic female characters in here that I really loved. We are in this world that is still reeling and recovering from something called the Goblin Wars. But it's a really interesting fantasy novel, and I would recommend it. I am planning to read his next book, which is a prequel to this book called The Daughter's War, and I have heard that that's actually a stronger book than this one, but I did really enjoy this. I struggled at the beginning. I think it's a little slow in the beginning to get started and really get you in there. But once I was in, I was all in, and I really enjoyed the ending. So 3.5 stars, recommended for fans of kind of humorous grimdark fantasy, and I'm excited to read something else by the author. Next up, we have Hell Followed With Us by Andrew Joseph White. I'm going to show you the cover on this one because it's so pretty. This is Andrew Joseph White's debut novel. I've actually read a previous book by this author. It's called The Spirit Bears Its Teeth. It has a very similar kind of cover, but that's actually a historical fantasy, and this one's a little bit more of a contemporary post-apocalyptic dystopian tale. We are following a character who is on the run from the apocalyptic cult that raised him, that actually brought the apocalypse on the world. Benji is trans, and that is not accepted by the world that he has come from, and he ends up on the run and finds this group of teenagers who are hiding out in an abandoned LGBT center. And it's the story of how they, try to save the world. It's kind of a standard kind of adventure tale, right? I'm going to tell you all that I didn't like this nearly as much as I liked The Spirit Bares Its Teeth. This ended up at a 2.5 star for me. I just didn't feel that the characters had a lot of depth to them. I love the representation in the book, all the different people and their different identities. I thought that was really great, but I wanted to feel like we knew them more as people outside of that identity. And that's what I didn't get. The characterization just was not really there for me. And I do feel like that in his second book, The Spirit Bares Its Teeth, again, that's one of my favorite books. He does that. And I think it's just being a debut novel. This one just didn't work quite as well for me. It is a horror novel. It is pretty bloody. There's a lot of body horror, particularly in this, so be aware if you're planning to read it. My recommendation would be that you read his second book and maybe you skip this one unless you just feel like you really vibe with his writing, because this one it was a disappointment for me. If I were doing categories this month, this would be my most disappointing because I thought it was going to be 5 stars and then it was not. So then I was on to the 4th book in a series that I'm in the middle of. That series is The Expanse, and this month I read Cibola Burn. It's by James S.A. Corey. This is book number 4. I think it's the second longest book in the series. It's about 600 pages long. That seems right. Yeah, it's about 600 pages long. And at this point, I don't know what to say that I can't spoil, but I will talk about the series a little bit in general. This is the story of James Holden and his crew as they travel in this kind of newly expanded universe. So we are kind of in a near future kind of Earth situation where Earth has moved on to colonize the rest of the solar system, especially Mars, but also asteroids and moons. And there's a lot of stuff that goes on in these. These are great space operas. They are actually probably my favorite space opera series that I've ever read. This was 4 stars for me. My favorite so far is book 3 in the series, but I did really enjoy this one. It was maybe a little long. And this, I again don't want to tell you the setup because I don't want to spoil it, but I did really enjoy it and I would recommend it. The next book that I read is one that was on my 25 in 2025 list. So I have marked it off, and that is Shards of Honor by Lois McMaster Bujold. This is the first book in the Vorkosigan saga. This is a series that has at least, I think, 18 books, possibly more if you include novellas in it. And I've really been wanting to read it because I've heard that for a series that started in the 1980s, this was very groundbreaking, particularly in its depiction of women. So this is the story of Cordelia. Cordelia is a scientist who lives on Beta Colony, and her group of scientists that are exploring this planet have been attacked by a group of people from the planet Barriar. And I think I'm saying that right. So her ship escapes, but she finds herself on this journey with a leader of the Barriarans. I swear that's what it says. And it's basically their love story. So the real main character of this series, I believe, is their son. So this is just the story of how they met. This was a 2.5 star read for me, which actually was pretty disappointing, but I am reserving my judgment on the series because I do understand that this was the first book that she wrote in the series and maybe one of the earlier books that she wrote. For an enemies to lover kind of like sci-fi thing, it really didn't work for me. I didn't see, there's a little bit of an insta-love situation with the other character. And then there was also a lot of political stuff going on in the background that I was having difficulty understanding from the context that I was given within this book. But again, I suspect it's going to get better. So the second part of this story is going to be in the book Barriar. And I am hoping to be able to read that next month, but it's going to depend. My library does not have the ebook. None of my libraries have the ebook for this. And I think there might be like an issue with libraries getting these ebooks. I'm not sure. I requested it, so we'll see if they get it. One of the libraries around here does have a physical copy, so I could get that. Or I could buy the book from Amazon, but I am disinclined to do so because I don't think I gave the first one enough stars for that. So I might read it next month, but it might hold on until I can get my hands on a copy of it. But for right now, it's kind of a let's pause on that and see what I think after I've read some more of the series, because I feel like this probably was not its strongest entry. And finally, the last book that I read in January was The Outcast Mage by Annabel Campbell. This was an arc that I received from Orbit, And I was not sure that I was actually going to get to it this month because the arc that I originally got had some weird formatting stuff in it. And so I waited until the book was actually released this past Tuesday. And I got it from my library and I read it then. And I really enjoyed it. This is a debut novel. It is a story of a young woman who is a hollow mage. She's in a magical academy, and while she does have magical potential, she has magic inside her, she's not actually been able to perform any magic. So they call her the hollow mage, and she's not very popular, as you can imagine, within the magical academy. This all exists in the context of a world where we have mages and we have people who are called hollows who are without magic, and they are very much on the lower rungs of society. It's kind of a similar setup, I would say, in some ways to Blood Over Brighthaven by M.L. Wong, which I read last year and really enjoyed. This is a little bit of a less aggressive book in terms of its themes, and it's also not a standalone. So this is the start of a trilogy, so it doesn't go quite as far into it. But we do, over the course of the book, find out what is going on with her a little bit and follow her to some other places within this world. I really enjoyed it. It was about a 4-star read for me. I'm definitely planning to continue the series. I would say that this is going to straddle the line between young adult and adult. There's a little bit of spice toward the very end, but not a lot. But the characters in general, I would say, feel a little bit younger and the themes are a little bit less complex. I would imagine this is probably a book that the publisher was saying, okay, well, which one's it going to be? Because it could be either. It is categorized as an adult fantasy, and I am very curious to see where the next 2 books are going to go. And there you have it, all 12 books that I read in the month of January. I had a really great reading month, and I would love if you would leave me a comment and let me know something that you read that you really loved in January. I hope you all have a great week. I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.